The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. The yard is already overfilled when the gate slides shut. Men stand so close their shoulders touch, even though no one wants to be touched. Tattoos cover arms, necks, and faces, symbols burned into skin that decide who lives near who eats where, who walks safely, and who doesn't. Every mark means allegiance. Every mark is watched. The heat presses down, heavy and unforgiving. There are more bodies than the prison was ever meant to hold. No space to step back. No space to avoid eye contact. In a place like this, overcrowding turns silence into a threat. A laugh breaks out on one side of the yard. Too loud. Too confident. Heads turn. Conversations stop. A small gap opens between groups that have hated each other for years but are now forced to share the same concrete. Guards see it forming before it happens. The way men shift their weight. The way hands flex and unclench. The way breathing changes. Radios crackle, but no one moves fast enough to stop what's already building. This prison isn't tense because the men are violent. It's violent because there are too many of them, packed together with nowhere to release the pressure. One wrong step, one sign of disrespect, one moment where someone stands where they don't belong, and the entire place is ready to explode. Because in the world's toughest, overcrowded prisons, violence doesn't arrive with a warning. It's already there, waiting. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The prison rose out of the desert like a mistake that couldn't be erased. Heat wrapped around the concrete from morning until night, trapping everything inside it. Officially, it was a state facility in the American Southwest. To the men who lived there, it was just another place built too small for the number of bodies forced into it. It had been designed for a little over 2,000 inmates. By the time this story begins, more than 4,000 had been pushed inside. Every count proved it. Every movement showed it. Beds were stacked tighter. Walkways shrank. Tempers shortened. When a transport bus arrived, no one cheered. New arrivals meant less space, longer lines, more eyes watching. Guards opened the gates and dozens of inmates stepped off, chains clinking softly, faces already tense. They were processed quickly, moved through intake, and funneled into housing units that were already overflowing. Cells built for one now held two, sometimes three. When there were no cells left, open areas were converted into living space. Classrooms, day rooms, even the gym. The yard was where the pressure showed first. Late morning, the gates opened and hundreds of inmates flooded out at once. There wasn't enough room for distance. Men spread out in clusters that formed naturally, guided by rules that didn't need to be spoken. Race came first. Everything else came after. Correctional officers watched from elevated positions and walked the perimeter with careful steps. They knew the crimes these men carried with them. Assault, robbery, long sentences for violent acts. But inside this prison, the crime didn't matter as much as the group. Overcrowding changed behavior. Men who might have kept to themselves outside were forced into constant contact. Privacy disappeared. Respect became a survival tool. When too many men shared too little space, hostility grew without effort. Lieutenant Aaron Cole felt it every day. He had worked yards like this before, but this one was different. The numbers were higher. The energy was sharper. He scanned faces while walking, eyes moving from tattoos to body language. A raised chin. A hard stare held a second too long. That was how it started. Disrespect didn't need words. On the yard, inmates lifted weights, paced in tight circles, or leaned against walls pretending not to watch each other. But everyone watched. Every movement was noticed. Who walked where? Who crossed whose line? Self-segregation was complete. Whites stayed together. Black inmates claimed their side. Southern Hispanic groups held the center ground. Other groups filled what space remained. Old rivalries were squeezed together by necessity, not choice. That closeness made every encounter dangerous. An officer shouted at an inmate to remove something from his head. The inmate complied, but his eyes stayed locked on another group. Nothing happened yet, but the yard shifted. A silence fell that felt louder than noise. Cole keyed his radio and slowed his pace. He knew better than to rush. Panic could trigger what he was trying to prevent. Overcrowding meant fights didn't stay small. One punch pulled in 10 men. 10 became 50. Then the yard was lost. The prison had seen it before. Last summer, riots had flared on and off for weeks. Officers had responded to stabbings, beatings, and mass fights. Weapons appeared from nowhere. Homemade blades. Heavy pieces of metal shaped into clubs. The ingenuity of desperation never failed to surprise. Inmates prepared for conflict as if it were scheduled. They trained their bodies. They studied the yard. They learned where to stand and when to move. And when things went wrong, they happened fast. The gym was worse. What had once been a place for exercise had become a massive dormitory. More than 100 inmates slept there, packed into a single open space. No walls. No doors. Just rows of bunks separated by narrow paths. Only a few officers monitored the area. They walked carefully, knowing that if violence broke out, they would be surrounded before help could arrive. Living that close changed people. At night, there was no quiet. Someone was always awake. Talking, laughing, arguing. The noise never stopped. Studying was nearly impossible. Sleep came in fragments. Hidden among the bunks were weapons disguised as everyday items. A toothbrush sharpened down. Metal torn from a fixture and wrapped in cloth. Some were even hidden outside, planted in the ground and disguised to look like weeds, ready to be pulled up if chaos erupted. These weapons weren't always used against enemies. Sometimes they enforced rules. Sometimes they reminded people where they stood. New inmates learned quickly who to walk with, who to avoid, what side of the sinks belonged to which group, which showers were safe to use. Invisible borders controlled everything. One man, early 20s, recently transferred in, tried to focus on something else. Education. He had signed up for classes, hoping to earn credits that could change his future. Books gave him a reason to look down instead of around. But the prison didn't care about his plans. Education couldn't protect him from where he slept or who stood beside him on the yard. Older inmates questioned him. Why study here? Why draw attention? In a place like this, standing out was dangerous. Even positive change could be seen as weakness or disrespect. As temperatures climbed, tempers followed. Then it happened. On a Friday afternoon, violence erupted on one of the yards without warning. A confrontation between rival groups turned physical. Shouts echoed. Bodies surged forward. Within minutes, dozens of inmates were involved. Officers responded immediately, ordering everyone down. Alarms screamed. The yard became a blur of movement and shouting. Non-lethal force was used to regain control. Pepper spray filled the air. The fight broke apart, but the damage was done. 28 inmates were pulled out and isolated. The facility went into lockdown. Cells slammed shut. Doors stayed closed day and night. Inmates were confined to their cells around the clock, released only briefly for showers. Meals were passed through slots and steel doors. Anger built with every hour. Lockdown didn't erase tension. It concentrated it. Men talked through vents. Notes were passed. Workers allowed to move between buildings carried messages, rumors, and plans. Stories changed with every retelling. No one knew exactly what had happened, only who they thought was responsible. That uncertainty was dangerous. When inmates not involved in the riot were allowed out for custodial work, movement resumed beneath the surface. Contraband shifted hands. Information spread. Revenge was discussed quietly. Officers knew this phase was just as risky as open violence. Lieutenant Cole and the investigative team began looking for answers. Mail was read carefully. Letters often revealed more than interviews ever did. Locked down and cut off, inmates wrote to the outside world, explaining their version of events. One letter stood out. The language was coded, but the meaning was clear enough to those who understood the signs. A gesture had been made. A symbol flipped into an insult. Pride had been challenged. Inside an overcrowded prison, disrespect didn't fade. It multiplied. The team studied maps of the yard. They traced where the fight started, who stood where, who arrived recently, and might not understand the fragile balance yet. One name kept coming up. A new arrival. A visible tattoo. A symbol that mocked a rival group's identity. That symbol had been enough. Officers planned a search. Careful. Controlled. They knew inmates had been locked down too long and frustration was high. Every move had to be precise. When they entered the cell, the evidence was there. not hidden but worn openly on skin. A mark that explained everything. The cause of the riot wasn't drugs. It wasn't territory. It was disrespect, amplified by overcrowding and pressure that never released. With the cause identified, the lockdown could eventually end. But the prison wouldn't reset. The anger wouldn't disappear. Some inmates would move on. Others would remember. And as the doors prepared to open again, everyone inside knew the truth. The valley wasn't calming down. It was only waiting for the next spark. When the doors finally opened after days of lockdown, the air felt different, heavier than before. Men stepped out slowly, eyes sharp, bodies tense. Lockdown never erased anger. It fermented it. Those who had been confined replayed every rumor in their heads. Who started it? Who backed down? Who owed who? In an overcrowded prison, memory was long and forgiveness was rare. The first place officers focused on was the gym. It was the most dangerous space in the entire facility. 120 men living in an open room with no cells, no doors, no real barriers. Just rows of bunks and invisible borders that everyone understood but no one could see. Each area belonged to someone. The sinks, the showers, the toilets. Walk through the wrong lane and it could be taken as a challenge. Sit on the wrong bench and it could be read as disrespect. Even cutting between bunks instead of walking the long way around could start a fight. New transfers were placed there first, not because it was safer, but because there was nowhere else to put them. One of those transfers had arrived just days before the riot. He was young, restless, with fresh ink on his arms and neck. The tattoos weren't decorative. They were statements, symbols that spoke for him before he ever opened his mouth. Inside this prison, ink was language. When staff told him he was moving into the gym, he lost control. He argued. He raised his voice. He demanded to see a counselor, a sergeant, anyone who would listen. He had just started classes. He had a routine, a plan. None of that mattered. The prison didn't move people based on comfort. It moved them based on space. And space was gone. By the time he was escorted into the gym, eyes were already on him. Men noticed new faces immediately. They noticed tattoos even faster. Someone nodded. Someone else turned away. No one smiled. The noise hit him first. Voices overlapping. Metal clinking. Laughter that sounded forced. The smell of sweat and cleaning chemicals mixed together. There was no quiet corner to think. He claimed a bunk and sat down, gripping his books tighter than he realized. Studying here felt impossible, but giving up felt worse. Across the facility, another inmate was trying to stay invisible. He was older, built solid, his tattoos faded but unmistakable. Years inside had taught him restraint, but restraint didn't erase obligation. He belonged to a group that expected loyalty above everything else. If trouble came to his people, he would have to respond. That rule had never changed. What had changed was what he stood to lose. He had passed his classes. His grades were posted. He was eligible to graduate. For the first time in more than a decade, his family was scheduled to come see him. His daughter. His parents. The certificate waiting for him wasn't just paper. It was proof he was more than the worst thing he'd ever done. But in this place, progress didn't shield anyone. Officers felt it too. The calm after lockdown was never real. It was a pause, not a resolution. They watched the gym closely, knowing that a single fight there could spiral into something unmanageable. Mail continued to be monitored. Conversations were overheard. Workers moved between buildings carrying more than mops and trash bags. They carried information. Stories grew sharper. Details changed. The riot on the yard became a legend in the telling. Some said it was planned. Others said it was inevitable. Everyone agreed on one thing. It wasn't over. In the gym, lines hardened. New rules were explained quietly. Where to stand. Where not to walk. Which sink was off limits. Which shower belonged to which group. The young inmate nodded and listened, but frustration burned under his skin. He wanted to focus on school, on something that led out of this place. But the environment dragged at him, pulling him back into survival mode. At night, studying meant blocking out insults, laughter, arguments. It meant pretending the tension wasn't there. Sometimes he succeeded. Sometimes he didn't. Officers increased patrols, walking the narrow lanes between bunks. They knew how fast things could change. One shove, one accusation, one man feeling disrespected. The older inmate kept his head down, counting days. He avoided the yard when he could. He stayed close to those who understood what he was trying to do. Still, eyes followed him. Expectations hung in the air. Word spread that the facility might reopen all yards fully soon. That scared people more than lockdown, because reopening meant unresolved grudges meeting face to face again. On the morning the announcement came, the gym buzzed. Men whispered. Some stretched. Some paced. Some smiled in ways that didn't reach their eyes. Officers moved faster. Radios crackled more often. Everyone knew the risk. The gates opened. Inmates flowed out, filling the yard once more. Groups formed instantly, as if pulled together by magnets. The sun beat down, and the concrete radiated heat. The young inmate stayed close to his group, heart racing. He spotted faces he recognized from the gym. He spotted faces he didn't. Across the yard, the older inmate stood with his people, trying to stay calm. He told himself to focus on the end goal. Graduation. Family. Freedom. Then someone crossed a line. It wasn't dramatic. No shove. No punch. Just a gesture. A look. A step taken where it shouldn't have been. The yard reacted like dry grass to a spark. Shouts erupted. Bodies surged. Officers yelled commands that were swallowed by noise. Men ran toward the chaos instead of away from it. The older inmate felt the pull instantly. Obligations snapped tight around him. He hesitated, knowing what one wrong move could cost him. In the gym, the young inmate would later hear about it secondhand. How fast it happened. How many were involved? How close it came to spreading again. On the yard, officers fought to regain control, using every tool available to prevent another full-scale riot. Non-lethal force. Orders screamed until voices went hoarse. Eventually, the fighting broke apart. But something had changed. The fragile balance was gone. As inmates were herded back inside, faces burned with anger and anticipation. Some felt cheated. Others felt satisfied. None felt finished. Back in the gym, the young inmate sat on his bunk, hands shaking slightly. His books lay unopened beside him. Across the facility, the older inmate stood alone in his cell, staring at the wall. Graduation was still scheduled. For now. But he knew better than to celebrate early. Because in this prison, the closer you got to something good, the more dangerous everything became. And somewhere inside Red Valley, the next spark was already forming. The lockdown came back fast, tighter than before. Doors slammed shut across the facility, one after another, until the prison felt like it was holding its breath. The announcement echoed through the units, calm and official, but everyone knew what it meant. Someone had pushed too far. Someone had answered back, and now everyone would pay for it. Inside the gym, the change was immediate. Movement stopped. Men returned to their bunks, sitting instead of pacing, watching instead of talking. Lockdown in an open dorm was different. There were no doors to close, no walls to hide behind. Just bodies forced to stay still in the same shared space. Time slowed. Meals came late and small. Food trays slid in through guarded doors, passed hand to hand until they reached the far bunks. Complaints rose, then faded into quiet resentment. Hunger sharpened tempers, but no one wanted to be the first to snap. Officers increased their presence. Boots moved constantly through the narrow lanes. Eyes scanned hands, faces, tattoos. Every officer knew the gym could turn violent in seconds if the wrong tension was triggered. The young inmate tried to keep his routine. He woke early, sat on his bunk, and opened his books. The words blurred more often than not. Noise crept in from every direction. Someone arguing quietly. Someone laughing without humor. Someone whispering warnings about what might happen when the doors opened again. Studying felt like an act of defiance. Older inmates noticed. Some respected it. Others didn't. Questions came, soft but sharp. Why focus on school now? Why act like this place didn't run on different rules? The young inmate answered carefully, keeping his voice even. He knew better than to challenge anyone directly. But pressure didn't need confrontation to work. Across the facility, the older inmate sat alone in his cell, staring at a small stack of papers on his bunk. Grades. Notices. The document confirming his graduation date. He read them again and again, as if repetition could protect them. He had survived long enough to know better. Lockdown dragged on. Days blurred together. With every hour, frustration thickened. Men exercised in place, did push-ups beside their bunks, paced short distances before being told to stop. Rumors spread anyway. Someone said another yard was planning retaliation. Someone else claimed names had already been passed. Stories twisted as they moved, becoming more dangerous each time. Officers listened carefully. Investigative staff reviewed mail again, reading between lines written to friends and family outside. Codes appeared where ordinary language should have been. Symbols replaced names. Pride and anger hid behind casual phrases. One message confirmed what staff feared. The tension wasn't cooling. It was organizing. A decision was made. Selective releases would begin. Inmates not involved in recent disturbances would be allowed out for limited work details. Cleaning crews, kitchen duty, maintenance. It was a risk, but keeping everyone locked down forever wasn't an option. Movement resumed in fragments. Those selected walked the halls under close watch. Buckets, mops, trash carts moved through the units. But the real movement wasn't visible. Small items passed hand to hand. Notes tucked into folded cloth. Information traveled faster than officers could track. The young inmate wasn't selected for work. He stayed in the gym, watching others leave and return. He noticed how some came back with new confidence. Others came back quieter than before. That silence worried him more. One afternoon, voices rose near the sinks. Two men argued over space. It wasn't loud enough to draw officers at first. Others shifted on their bunks, attention snapping into focus. This was how it started. A senior inmate stepped in, his presence enough to shut it down. He spoke quietly, firmly. The argument ended without blows. But the warning lingered. The gym was a powder keg. Officers knew it. Inmates knew it. Everyone waited for the moment someone ignored the rules. When lockdown finally eased, it wasn't announced with relief. It was met with suspicion. Men stepped out carefully, like animals leaving shelter after a storm. The yard reopened in stages. Groups were released separately. Officers positioned themselves at every angle. Radios stayed open. Commands came faster. The older inmate joined his group when his turn came. He kept his head down, eyes forward. He repeated the same thought over and over. Just get through today. Across the yard, faces he recognized watched him. Some nodded. Some stared. Tattoos marked alliances clearly. He stayed where he belonged, careful not to drift. Minutes passed. Then someone shouted. Not an order. Not a warning. A challenge. Movement rippled through the yard like a wave. Men stood. Others rushed forward. Officers shouted commands that were ignored. The older inmate felt the pull again. The rule he had lived by for years tightened around him. Stand with your people. Always. He took a step. Then he stopped. In that pause, everything he had worked for hung in balance. Graduation. Family. The chance to walk out of this place different than he entered it. Around him, others didn't hesitate. The fight exploded on the far side of the yard, bodies colliding, shouts filling the air. Officers moved in fast, deploying non-lethal force to break it apart. The chaos spread just enough to threaten the whole space. The older inmate backed away, hands raised, forcing himself to stay out of it. His heart pounded. He knew some would notice. He knew some would remember. The fighting ended as quickly as it began. Inmates were ordered down. Cuffs snapped closed. Names were called. Men were pulled from the yard and escorted away. This time, the response was immediate. Administrative segregation. The worst offenders were isolated, stripped of contact, placed behind solid doors. Searches followed. Strip searches conducted carefully, professionally, looking for anything that could be used to hurt someone else. The prison locked down again. But this time, something was different. Graduation was still on the calendar. Staff debated it quietly. Security concerns clashed with the belief that progress mattered. Canceling it could undo months of work. Allowing it could invite risk. In the gym, the young inmate heard whispers. Graduation might still happen. It might not. No one knew for sure. He sat on his bunk that night, staring at his book without turning a page. Around him, the noise softened as men settled in. He thought about what it meant to change in a place designed to keep you the same. Across the facility, the older inmate lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. He replayed the moment he stopped himself on the yard. The looks he caught afterward. The questions that would come. He had chosen restraint. Now he would have to live with it. Because in Red Valley, choices were never forgotten. And when the doors opened again, the prison would remember who stood still and who didn't. The prison woke before sunrise. Lights snapped on in the corridors, washing concrete walls in pale white. The sound of keys and boots echoed through the units, sharper than usual. Something important was coming. Everyone felt it. Graduation day had not been canceled. For some inmates, the news landed like relief. For others, it felt like an insult. A pause in the routine. A reminder that a few men were being allowed to step briefly outside the role the prison assigned them. And in a place like Red Valley, pauses were dangerous. Staff moved carefully that morning. Counts were double-checked. Movement was staggered. Radios stayed open, voices low but constant. The administration knew the risk. Bringing families into a prison that had seen recent violence was never taken lightly. But they also knew what canceling it would mean. For years, the education program had been one of the few stabilizing forces inside the facility. Men who had nothing else to lose found something to protect. A goal, a date on a calendar, a reason to think twice. That morning, inmate work crews were released early. Under heavy supervision, they cleaned and painted. Folding chairs were set up. A small platform was arranged in a common area far from the yards. Banners were hung with care. The prison tried to look normal. In his cell, the older inmate stood quietly while an officer searched his bunk. The process was routine, but today it felt heavier. Every movement was watched. Every item inspected. When the officer finished, he nodded once and moved on. The older inmate sat down slowly. His hands were steady, but his chest felt tight. He had survived the yard. He had avoided the last fight. Still, he knew how fragile his position was. One accusation, one sudden incident, and he would be pulled from the list. Across the facility, in the gym, the young inmate listened to the morning noise rise around him. Men talked about the graduation in different tones. Some mocked it. Some respected it. Some ignored it entirely. He wasn't graduating. Not yet. But he watched closely. The idea that something positive could exist here still mattered to him, even if it felt distant. He opened his book and read a single paragraph. Then another. The words settled better than they had in days. Maybe because the prison itself seemed to be holding back, just for a moment. By mid-morning, families began to arrive. They passed through metal detectors, checkpoints, and searches. They waited in lines, holding paperwork and identification. Some carried photos. Some carried hope. All carried nerves. Inside, officers escorted selected inmates to the graduation area in small groups. Each movement was deliberate. No rushing. No shortcuts. When the older inmate was called, he felt his pulse spike. He stood, adjusted his clothing, and followed instructions exactly. The walk felt longer than usual. Every hallway seemed quieter. When he entered the room, he saw the chairs, the decorations, the families seated on the far side. He scanned the faces instinctively. Then he saw her. His daughter stood near the front, taller than he remembered, holding her hands together like she wasn't sure where to put them. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The prison, the tension, the noise. He sat down carefully, afraid that if he moved too fast, the moment would break. The ceremony began simply. A staff member spoke about effort, about consistency, about choosing something better in a place that made it hard to choose anything at all. Some inmates listened. Some stared straight ahead. All of them stayed still. Names were called one by one. When the older inmate's name was spoken, he stood and walked forward. Applause filled the room, louder than he expected. Not just from families, but from staff. Even from a few other inmates. He accepted the certificate with both hands. In that moment, it felt real. Afterward, there was a brief visiting period. Short, controlled, precious. He stepped forward and his daughter rushed into his arms. He held her carefully, aware of the officers watching, aware of how rare this was. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. Time moved too fast. When the signal came that visiting was over, the room shifted. Smiles faded. Hugs lingered. Families were escorted out slowly. The older inmate watched his daughter leave, memorizing the way she turned back one last time and waved. Then reality returned. Inmates were searched again. Certificates were collected and secured. The room was cleared. Chairs were stacked away. Graduation was over. By afternoon, the prison was back to itself. Metal detectors hummed. Strip searches resumed. Movement was restricted. The brief sense of normalcy vanished as if it had never been there. For the older inmate, the emotional high faded into exhaustion. He returned to his cell and sat on his bunk, staring at the wall. He felt proud. He felt exposed. Progress had made him visible. In Red Valley, visibility was a risk. In the gym, the young inmate heard about the ceremony from those who had worked nearby. He listened quietly, absorbing every detail. Part of him felt inspired. Another part felt restless. Life in the gym continued its chaotic rhythm. Noise returned. Card games started. Arguments sparked and faded. And slowly, the undercurrent shifted again. The graduation had reminded some inmates of what they didn't have. Of time lost. Of doors that felt permanently closed. Resentment crept in. Officers noticed the change. Small conflicts increased. Looks lingered too long. Men tested boundaries again. That evening, as count was being taken, a minor dispute broke out near the bunks. It was handled quickly. No punches thrown. No alarms triggered. But everyone felt it. The calm was thinning. Later that night, the young inmate lay on his bunk, staring up at the ceiling lights. Around him, voices rose and fell. He thought about the future he wanted and the present he was stuck in. Across the facility, the older inmate lay awake as well. Graduation was behind him now. The protection it offered was gone. All that remained was the prison. And in Red Valley, the most dangerous time wasn't before something good happened. It was after. Because when hope appeared, even briefly, it changed the balance. And the prison never stayed balanced for long. The aftermath didn't come with noise. It arrived quietly, in small changes that only people who lived inside the walls could feel. Counts tightened again. Movement schedules shifted without explanation. Officers lingered longer at doorways, watching faces instead of hands. The prison had absorbed the graduation, processed it, and now it was correcting for it. Balance restored. For the older inmate, life narrowed back down to routine. Wake up, count, chow, work, lockdown, repeat. The certificate he earned was no longer something he could touch. It existed somewhere in a file, somewhere beyond the fence, somewhere safe. What stayed with him was the memory, the sound of applause, the weight of his daughter's arms, the proof that he had not wasted every year inside. That memory became his shield. When conversations drifted toward bitterness, he stayed quiet. When jokes turned sharp, he didn't laugh. When tension rose, he stepped away early. Not because he was afraid, but because he finally had something that mattered more than reputation. Some noticed. A few respected it. Others didn't. But no one challenged him outright. Not yet. In the gym, the young inmate settled back into his studies with new discipline. The graduation had done something unexpected. It had made the future feel real, not just theoretical. He asked more questions. He listened more carefully. He learned which inmates had made it out, and which ones never would. He watched how choices stacked up over time. Who reacted? Who restrained themselves? Who disappeared after lockdowns and never returned? The prison kept teaching, even when it wasn't trying to. Weeks passed. The violence everyone expected didn't arrive all at once. It leaked out in fragments. A fight shut down early. A search that turned up contraband. A unit placed on restriction for reasons never explained. Red Valley didn't explode again. It simmered. And in that simmering, something subtle happened. Men adjusted. Lines hardened. Alliances recalibrated. The prison adapted to itself, the way it always had. For the older inmate, release was no longer just a word. It had a date, a shape, a weight. He counted backward quietly, never out loud. He avoided trouble not out of fear, but out of patience. He had learned something most inmates never did. Survival wasn't about winning every moment. It was about choosing which moments weren't worth losing everything over. On his last night in Red Valley, he lay on his bunk and listened to the familiar sounds. The distant shouting, the metal doors, the low hum of a building that never truly slept. It no longer felt like home, and that was how he knew he was ready to leave. The young inmate watched him go the next morning. No handshake, no goodbye, just a nod. A quiet acknowledgement between two people who understood what the place demanded and what it took to resist it. The gate closed behind the older inmate without ceremony. Inside, life continued. It always did. Red Valley remained overcrowded. Still tense. Still unforgiving. New men arrived. Others disappeared into segregation, transfer buses, or time itself. But the lesson lingered, carried by those who paid attention. In the world's toughest, overcrowded prisons, violence isn't just about anger. It's about pressure. It's about space. It's about what happens when human beings are packed together with nothing to lose. And sometimes, rarely, it's about what happens when someone finds something worth protecting. Because even in a place built to strip men down to their worst instincts, change can exist. Not loudly, not easily, but just long enough to matter. And in prisons like Red Valley, that may be the most dangerous and powerful thing of all. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.